folks. This is Marlin McKelvy. I'm the host of the Health Insurance Town Hall Facebook page and president of Consumer Directed Benefit Solutions. I'm taking my first stab at a video blog here. Not ideal conditions. Try and get better at this. But looking off into the night, I'm here in my fortress of solitude late on a Sunday night. There's no flames or smoke on the horizon in Memphis, so we seem to have survived the first weekend of the executive orders of President Trump, though the reaction of the press and many people has been very predictable.
Are you telling us absolutely everything?
Not exactly. We're also out of coffee. The situation. Trust me, there's absolutely nothing to worry about.
So, frustrated with Congress's inability to live up to its promises of repeal and replace that they've had 7 years to actually deliver on and be ready for, finally President Trump, I believe in probably a bit of frustration, took an action that he probably would have preferred not to have done. That's an executive order. And this is what got everybody into a tizzy at the end of last week. It's been on the newspapers, the TV, the radio, a lot of discussion, a lot of frantic concern, and I think, quite frankly, a lot of misinformation. I'm going to touch on some of the high points of what the executive orders really address here in just a little bit. But I think we've got to back up first. And while Health Insurance Town Hall should be about health insurance, unfortunately, it's very hard to separate politics from health insurance in today's world. So here's our problem. We have to go back to a little civics lesson. Right here, boys and girls. This is our problem. The Constitution. Not a very big thing. You can probably get through it about 15, 20 minutes. But this is really what it's all about. I could try and explain it to you. Probably could do it. But I thought I would bring in somebody even smarter to do a better job.
So can the president stop Obamacare subsidies? Jonathan Turley is a constitutional attorney and law professor, joins me now for some analysis. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
You were also the lead counsel for the U.S. House of Representatives in the challenge to the actions by the Obama administration to set up these subsidies in a court case that ended in victory.
That's right.
So this is a constitutional move.
It is. The original order that has just been rescinded was unconstitutional by a finding of a federal court. The court found it not only violated Article 1 of the Constitution, it violated the health care law itself, because Congress had the ability to grant subsidies under the federal law, but had chosen not to. In fact, the administration had come to Congress and asked for this money, and Congress said no. And then the president said, all right, I'll just order it directly from the Treasury. Well, you can't do that. I mean, the defining power of Congress is the power of the purse. And the federal judge issued an historic ruling and said, this is wrong. You can't violate the Constitution, no matter what your motivations are, no matter what you're complaining about with Congress. You have to play within the rules of the Constitution.
So obviously, there's a lot of pushback to that. Democrats, including one who was a part of the leadership during the setup of the law, who is now the California Attorney General, Javier Becerra, said this today.
The Trump administration is deciding not to follow the law. Everyone has to follow the law. Every one of us has to pay our bills. Just because Donald Trump is president doesn't mean he doesn't have to follow the law. We did not mean to have an executive decide which of the subsidies for Americans that would be paid and which wouldn't. Donald Trump is deciding which ones he wants to pay and which ones he doesn't. He doesn't get to do that just because he's president.
And you're saying Congress doesn't get to just make things up.
Well, it's rather bizarre because he's talking about a law that was, I'm sorry, an order that was found to be unconstitutional. So what President Trump just did is say we're not going to continue to pay subsidies that a federal court said was unconstitutional. And so what this does is returns the issue to where it should have remained all along, which is in Congress. You know, we don't have a lot of options in a democratic process. You can compromise and convince people in Congress, or you could try to change Congress, but you can't circumvent Congress. You can't just order the Treasury to release billions of dollars without an appropriation of Congress.
So what are these attorneys general like Becerra, and the map includes 18 states and the District of Columbia? What are they, you know, what grounds are they using to sue the administration over this decision to stop subsidies?
I expect they're going to try to relitigate what we litigated earlier in the Price case.
Which you welcome.
Which, frankly, I would welcome, because I think it'll amplify the victory we had before. But unfortunately, this is a sort of perpetual litigation machine that we've seen, where every move ends up in court. There's this cathartic reaction to go to court. I think that what these attorneys have to think about is how bad cases can make bad law for them. And they've already lost on this. Now, they could keep on returning to the table and putting bets down, but they lost, and lost big, in the previous litigation. They're going to be fighting for something that a court found was a violation of the core principles of the United States Constitution.
This is the legal side. The politics side, the president says he's up for negotiation. Anything could happen with Democrats coming to the table. You write in this opinion for The Hill, op-ed, that if Democrats looked at it about funding the wall, the president's border wall, and that they said no to that funding, and then the president said, you know what, I'm directing the Treasury to take the money anyway, right, that would be analogous.
It is. I mean, the Democrats are now applauding a president who circumvented Congress and just basically ordered the funding, billions of dollars worth, under this law. What if President Trump took that lesson to heart and just ordered billions to build the wall? You can't choose. You know, but what the difference is between governing by principle and governing by personality. It's clear that many of these Democrats, you know, liked obviously President Obama, do not like President Trump. But is that the system that you want? Is it a system that will turn on simply who's making the decision rather than whether they have the authority to make it?
The Trump administration's Affordable Care Act executive orders. All right, boys and girls, this would be the big kahuna of what President Trump announced last week in his executive orders, the discontinuation of the cost-sharing reduction payments. Most people don't know that the Affordable Care Act requires health insurers to reduce cost sharing. In other words, office visit copayments, plan deductibles, out-of-pocket maximums on health insurance plans for eligible low-income enrollees. These are people that earn between 100 and 250% of the federal poverty level and enrolled in a plan through the government marketplaces. Now, this financial assistance, the cost-sharing reductions that we're talking about, are in addition to the advanced premium tax credit that these people also qualify for that reduces the monthly premium that they pay. This is totally unaffected by President Trump's executive order. And President Trump did not do this out of a fit of pique. He did it to be in compliance with a federal court order. So the Trump administration had to discontinue these payments because Congress has not appropriated funds for these cost-sharing reductions, as we discussed earlier in this presentation. So really what President Trump is doing is boxing the Congress into a corner and forcing them to do their job, which is to budget things. So this will primarily affect insurers who will no longer be reimbursed for cost-sharing reductions, at least until Congress gets around to passing funding for them, but who are legally required to provide these cost-sharing reductions. As a result, cost-sharing reduction qualifying enrollees, they're not going to see any immediate impact in their lives. And quite frankly, most carriers in their 2018 rate filings inflated their silver plan rates in anticipation of this action, and they will be receiving higher monthly subsidies via the advanced premium tax credit subsidy to offset, at least in part, the money they're losing on the cost-sharing reductions. Another important change will have to do with association health plans. So the Trump administration has directed the Department of Labor to look at loosening regulations and revising their guidance on expanding access to association health plans in order to allow small businesses to band together to purchase insurance collectively, in many cases, I guess, even across state lines. Now, this may or may not be that big of a deal. By joining an association health plan, small employers, and this is some crucial language, I think, within the same line of business, so we're talking about a bunch of trucking companies or a bunch of veterinarian groups, all banding together. We're not really talking about, as I interpret things, a bunch of random different businesses banding together to purchase health insurance together. So this will be a little bit harder than it sounds. Anyways, the advantage of this is that by banding together and forming a larger group, you're subject to the large group requirements of the Affordable Care Act, which are less restrictive in many ways than the small group Affordable Care Act rules. Another important change could be the impact on short-term medical health insurance plans. So President Trump has instructed the Department of Health and Human Services and the Internal Revenue Service to revise rules on short-term medical plans to allow them to be sold to last for as long as 12 months and to be renewable. Now, this is not really asking that much because, quite frankly, it was just a parting shot at the end of the Obama administration that changed this. Stating that they were trying to save the health insurance marketplaces, a ruling was issued that prohibited the sale of short-term medical policies to individuals for more than 3 months at a time. So really, what the Trump administration is doing is simply seeking to return the short-term medical insurance market to its decades-long status quo that existed prior to this Obama administration ruling. And the irony of this is that there were never more than a few to several 100,000 people at any given time through this period enrolling in short-term medical plans, and most of them were your typical short-term medical plan buyer that was between jobs or a retiree that needed coverage for a few months before he became 65. There weren't millions of people, not even hundreds of thousands of people that were really avoiding the Affordable Care Act plans by using short-term medical plans. Next will be changes in the approach towards health reimbursement arrangements, or HRAs. HRAs are a method for employers to give money to their employees for the employees to expend on certain defined medical expenses. The Trump administration's executive order seeks to loosen up a lot of these restrictions, specifically to make employer HRA contributions tax deductible as opposed to just a business expense deduction, and to allow HRA funds to be used by employees to reimburse their health insurance premium expenses on their group plans, or to allow these HRA funds to be used to pay for non-group, in other words, individual health insurance. So this would give a great deal more financial flexibility to a number of businesses and individuals as to how they go about buying their health insurance. And then there is also the expanded exemption for covering contraceptive services. So there's been a lot of controversy and lawsuits about this. You've probably all heard of it, the nuns and priests having to pay for birth control, the Hobby Lobby case, and other examples like that. The interim final rules that were issued earlier in October expanded the current exemption for employers not to cover contraceptive services under their group health plans. President Trump's order just kind of speeds things up and expands it somewhat. So effective immediately, employers may exclude coverage for contraceptives based on their moral or religious objections to that. But this does not necessarily mean that their employees will lose access to contraceptive services. The employer can choose to exercise what's called the accommodation process. And this will simply pass responsibility for covering contraceptive services to their health insurance carrier or third-party administrator, and will still alleviate the financial responsibility for paying for contraceptives that their employees or their dependents might have been faced with. So, as we can see here, really, with the exception of the discontinuation of the cost-sharing reduction payments and the contraceptive exemption, President Trump's recent executive orders are not making any dramatic, immediate changes to the Affordable Care Act. Now, returning short-term medical plans to their previous status, that could be done relatively quickly with some orders from the Department of Health and Human Services. But the requested changes for association health plans and health reimbursement arrangements are far more complicated, will require that certain laws be amended, changed, or revoked, and could literally take months or years to fully implement. So that's it, folks. Do the Trump executive orders really look like the end of the world to you? And so I hope that this helped give everyone here a better idea of what the executive orders of President Trump last week really were, what they're focused on, and what their impact is going to be. And in all candor, there's not really going to be much immediate impact, not even from the cost sharing reduction issues that we're talking about, at least as far as the people out there that qualify for those things. So thank you for your time, and be visiting us with me again. We'll be talking in the future about some solutions for the problems that a lot of you are faced with out there. Thank you.